right, good afternoon. I'll start off with a statement on Ecuador. The Secretary General welcomed the holding of peaceful general elections on 7th February and took note of the announcement of the official results by the National Electoral Council on February 21st. He trusts that the Electoral Disputes Tribunal will address any complaints promptly and diligently. The Secretary General calls on all stakeholders to act responsibly and with respect for the institutional and legal frameworks during the period leading up to the holding of the presidential runoffs on 11 April. And once I'm finished, we will be joined by our friend, the Chief Economist of the United Nations, Elliot Harris. He will brief you on a new system of natural capital accounting known as SEEA, the System of Environmental Economic Accounting. This is expected to be adopted by the 52nd session of the UN Statistical Commission, and Farhan will moderate that remotely. This morning, the Secretary General spoke by video message to the Powering Past Coal Alliance virtual summit hosted by Canada and the United Kingdom. The Secretary General called on governments, private companies, and local authorities to take 3 steps. First, to cancel all global coal projects in the pipeline and to end the deadly addiction to coal. He urged all countries of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD, to commit to phasing out coal by 2030 and urged non-OECD countries to do so by 2040. Second, to end international financing of coal plants and shift investments to renewable energy projects. And third, to jumpstart a global effort to finally organize a just transition, going coal plant by coal plant if necessary. And that statement is online. And you will have seen yesterday afternoon, following the high-level pledging conference on Yemen, the Secretary General said the outcome was disappointing. The Secretary General warned that cutting aid is a death sentence and thanked those who did pledge generously, and he asked others to consider again what they can do to help to stave off the worst famine the world has seen in decades. As you know, the pledges approximately amounted to $1.7 billion, less than we received for the humanitarian response plan last year, and $1 billion less than what was pledged in 2019. A number of Nigeria notes, if you'll allow. The UN resident and humanitarian coordinator in Nigeria, Edward Colon, today strongly condemned the attack by armed groups in Dikwa in Borno State. Several aid facilities were attacked during that incident. We're still receiving information from the attack, which started last night. The premises of several aid agencies and a hospital were reportedly set ablaze or sustained damage. Mr. Colon expressed concern about the safety and security of civilians in Dikwa, including the internally displaced people that are inside and outside the camps, as well as the thousands of people who had returned to the community after years of being displaced. He said the violent attack will impact the support provided to nearly 100,000 people who are desperately in need of humanitarian assistance and protection, particularly as the COVID-19 pandemic could spread in Borno State. He stressed that civilians and aid workers, their facilities and assets should never be targeted and must be protected at all times. And he called on the armed parties to immediately stop the violence and respect international humanitarian and human rights law and ensure the protection of civilians and humanitarian workers. A couple of good news items from Nigeria. First, as you will have seen, concerning the release of some 200 schoolgirls who were kidnapped last week from Zamfara State. They have been released. The Secretary General is, of course, delighted with that news. The UNICEF representative in the country, Peter Hawkins, reiterated that attacks on students in schools are not only reprehensible, but a violation of the rights of children to an education. And he called on the government to take all measures to protect schools in the country so that children will not be fearful of going to school or parents afraid of sending their children to school. And third item on Nigeria, today the country received nearly 4 million doses of the COVID-19 from the COVAX facility. The delivery of the vaccine from India is part of a first wave of arrivals in Nigeria that will continue in the coming days and weeks. Edward Colon, the resident coordinator, said his team is committed to supporting the vaccination campaign. The arrival of the vaccine marks the beginning of the national vaccination plan, which targets priority groups, starting with frontline health workers. Our team has repurposed more than $6 million worth of existing funding to address the multiple impacts of the pandemic in Nigeria. And want to flag a joint the outcome of a virtual meeting on the Central African Republic, which brought together the African Union Commissioner, Smail Shergi, the President of the Commission of the Economic Community of Central African State, Ambassador Gilberto da Piedade Verissimo, and Undersecretary General for Peace Operations, Jean-Pierre Lacroix, and the EU High Representative, Joseph Borrell. They met with the Central African President, Faustin Archange Touadéra. The discussion focused on the political situation and the peace process in the country. They congratulated the president on his election and invited all national actors to accept the outcome of the election as proclaimed by the Constitutional Court, and called on them to work together for the electoral process within the legal deadlines in a free, transparent, credible, and inclusive manner. They also urged the president to open an inclusive political dialogue and to de-escalate current tensions and help create conditions conducive to the strengthening of democracy, good governance, humanitarian access, as well as the promotion of human rights, and to enable the sustainable return of internally displaced people and refugees. They also urged President Touadéra to relaunch the peace and reconciliation process, including through the implementation of the February 2019 Political Agreement for Peace and Reconciliation. The joint communique will be issued with more details. Turning to Ethiopia, I can tell you that our humanitarian colleagues have seen the media and other reports of abuses in Tigray, and they call on all to ensure that access is granted for humanitarian workers to provide assistance and aid to victims and survivors. Looting of humanitarian supplies, destruction and vandalization of civilian infrastructure have been reported by our national and international partners on the ground. We, along with our humanitarian partners, continue to call on the parties to the conflict to comply with their obligations under international humanitarian law to protect civilians and civilian infrastructure. More than 88 workers have received clearances to go to Tigray, but the permits are for short missions and for personnel returning to Tigray. Authorizations for needs assessment missions are still pending with the authorities. Hundreds of thousands of people affected have not been reached, particularly in the rural areas of Tigray. Despite the challenges, humanitarians on the ground are working to increase the response, with some progress made, especially on food assistance in the main cities. In addition, more than 280,000 people received clean water, and more than 35,000 refugees in Mai Aini and Adi Harush camps are getting food assistance, and more than 65,000 displaced people receive shelter and critical household items. UNHCR and the World Food Program today appealed for $266 million to end food ration cuts for over 3 million refugees in Eastern Africa. Funding shortages have forced cuts to up to 60%. UN agencies warned of growing risks, including increased malnutrition, anemia, and stunted child growth. More information online. And on Myanmar, I can tell you that our Special Envoy, Christine Schreiner-Bergener, continues her conversations with various parties regarding the current situation. She continues to stress the need for member states to act collectively and in unity to help the people of Myanmar safeguard their democratic aspirations. And keep your fingers crossed. If all goes well, we will have her as a guest tomorrow at noon. She'll be briefing from Bern in Switzerland, I believe. Couple more notes, if you'll allow me. The UN mission in Libya today strongly encouraged the House of Representatives to meet as scheduled to discuss and consider the vote of confidence on the cabinet to be proposed by the Prime Minister-designate. They encouraged the Prime Minister-designate to present the lineup of the government without further delay. This call comes in line with the increasing public demand for the urgent need to form unified governments to address the most pressing needs and facilitate the holding of national elections in December. The UN mission is not in a position, they tell us, to comment on media reports circulating about alleged briberies during the Libyan Political Dialogue Forum in Tunisia. The panel of experts who produced the reports in which those allegations were cited are independent from the mission and reports to the Security Council Sanctions Committee directly. I want to flag that in Ukraine, the first UN-organized humanitarian convoy with 133 tons of shelter materials and other relief items passed through Shastia crossing point to the non-governmental control area of Lubansk Oblast. The humanitarian coordinator in Ukraine, Osnat Lubrani, said this was an achievement and congratulated all relevant parties for their assistance. She stressed that the importance of ensuring that humanitarian convoys continue to pass directly to Donetsk region through the crossing point at Novotroyske. This is only partially operational and has been temporarily closed to the passing of humanitarian convoys. With the growing needs of 3.4 million Ukrainians in the COVID-19 pandemic, Ms. Lubrani urged all concerned parties to ensure the unimpeded humanitarian aid and delivery and humanitarian workers to people who need it. The UN Conference on Trade and Development is launching its Technology and Innovation Report 2021, Catching the Technological Waves, Innovation with Equity. That will be tomorrow at 9:30. The report focuses on frontier technologies and the impact of inequalities, in particular for countries already impacted by digital divide. You'll find more details if you tune in line on the UNCTAD website. We are up to 63 member states who have paid their budget dues in full. And that's because Italy, Namibia, and Nepal put their checks in the mail, and we've received them. Mr. Bays, and then we'll go to Ms. Lederer.
I warn you, I've got a lot of questions today.
Well,
so I will restrict.
Share with Edie, please.
I will restrict to Myanmar first, if I can.
Okay.
And we did a long run through, and I know there's a very complicated procedure and credentials committees in the GA and whatever. I'm aware of all.
So you don't want me to answer?
I know. I do want to ask you, because there are two different letters.
Yeah.
There's one from the 28th of February, which says that from the mission, on the mission's headed paper with a mission stamp, saying that the DPR is now the acting ambassador. And then there's another letter on the same headed note paper, signed by Jo Mortun, the PR who gave the speech on Friday, saying he's still the ambassador. Obviously, there's a dispute here, and obviously it will go through all the procedures. But the Secretary-General is in charge, for example, of the security in this building, and it seems you have a deputy ambassador and an ambassador who have different views. They both have UN passes. So the simple question is this: who does the Secretary-General believes right now is the ambassador of Myanmar?
As always, your questions are direct. The answer is not always that clear. You've laid out the situation as it is, so I can confirm that we've received 2 letters. They're currently under review. So let me just give you a bit more detail. So we did receive a letter yesterday from Kyaw Moe-tun, the permanent representative of Myanmar, which was addressed to the President of the General Assembly with copy to the Secretary General's office, informing that he remains Myanmar's permanent representative to the United Nations. We've also received a note verbal from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Myanmar this morning, which was addressed to the Secretary General's office, informing that the State Administration Council of the Republic of the Union of Myanmar has terminated the duties and responsibilities of Mr. Kyaw Moe-tun as permanent representative of Myanmar, and that Mr. U Tin Maung Nang, deputy permanent representative, has been assigned as the chargé d'affaires ad interim of the permanent mission. Those are the facts.
But that doesn't answer my simple, practical question.
I understand.
If there's a GA meeting,
yeah.
Is it who gets to the seat first currently, as they both have active UN passes?
I think we are, well, both can come into the building. Who is recognized by the president of whichever meeting is going on, that will be an issue up for member states. We are, I mean, let's be honest here, we're in a very unique situation we have not seen in a long time. We are trying to sort through all the legal protocol and other implications, and as soon as we have something more to share, we will share it with you. Ms. Letter, James is yielding. Yeah. Hold on 2 seconds. Michelle, hold on. I'll come right back to you, I promise. Okay. All right. You know, you guys are all so nice to each other. Edie has yielded to you, Michelle, and overruled my ruling. Go ahead.
Thanks so much, Edie. It's a really quick one. Can you just clarify the letter you received this morning from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs? Does that also then make the Secretary-General aware that there has been a change in power in Myanmar?
No. It is the letter that we've received is focused on the representation of the Republic of the Union of Myanmar here, and it was sent by the, on letterhead from the government of the Republic of the Union of Myanmar, Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
So does that then go back to what you said yesterday about you haven't been notified of any change?
The only letters we have received regard the representation of Myanmar here and nothing else.
And would that have to be signed by Aung San Suu Kyi or the president for you to accept it?
I'm not going to go into further speculation on the letters. Edie.
My question seems so boring afterwards since James did Myanmar. On this ongoing event in Dikwa in Nigeria, was anybody killed or injured? Any idea who the perpetrators are? And were any of these humanitarian facilities UN facilities, or were these all NGO facilities?
They were sites managed by aid agencies. My understanding on the ground, a lot of those spaces are shared. I am not aware of any casualties from the aid community, and none from as far as I know, from the UN community. But as I said, the situation on the ground is still not completely clear in terms of the smoke still being there.
And follow up on Tigray. You said that there are all of these basically possible atrocities, etc., going on. There are UN people on the ground there now. Is anybody actually doing or taking part in any kind of investigation of what's happening?
Not that I'm aware of. We have, as we said, a very limited international presence. We have some local staff. Their focus right now is on providing aid and giving food. As we said, we have not been able to reach all the areas. We need to, especially those in the rural parts of the province.
And any reason that the government has given for denying those visas?
You know, we're not in, let me put it this way, I don't think we're in a situation of denial. We're in a situation of bureaucratic impediments and a slow bureaucratic process. The authorization that's been given for international staff has been basically for people who had been in Mekelle before. We obviously need new staff and the assessment mission as well. Okay, if you have a Toby.
Thank you, Steph. My question is, do you have any additional information on how many candidates and prospective candidates there are now in the selection process for Secretary General? Can you offer anything more? Thank you.
No, all that I know is my boss is a candidate. and I've heard what Brendan has said to you earlier, so I have nothing else. Just to add on Nigeria, Edie, the humanitarian hub was managed by the International Organization for Migration. Okay, Philippe and then Maggie.
Merci, Stéphane. I would like to know if the special envoy for Myanmar had a direct contact with the military. I presume it's the deputy chief of the army, since Friday, since her speech at the General Assembly.
No, I'm not aware that she's had a contact since Friday. Okay,
Thank you.
Maggie and then Abdelhamid and then Joe. Bless you. Maggie? All right, the Voice of America has lost its voice. Abdelhamid.
Thank you, Stéphane. Israel is distributing vaccine to Honduras, Hungary, Guatemala, and Czech Republic in what is called vaccine diplomacy. According to Article 59 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, Israel is responsible for the food stuff, as I read it from the article, food stuff, medical supplies, and clothing. If that is not apartheid, then can you define what is apartheid?
Listen, I'm not sure I heard a question there. I don't know. I have no confirmation of any export by Israel of vaccines to other places. I think we've talked here about the responsibilities of Israel vis-a-vis the Palestinian population as under international law. We've also talked about what's worked, and we've talked about what's not worked. Joe Klein.
Steph?
Hold on. Okay, go ahead, Maggie.
It's Mag. I got unmuted.
Okay. No comment. Go ahead.
Can I ask my question?
Yeah.
Okay, first of all, on Myanmar, the special envoy of the Secretary General said the other day in the General Assembly that countries should not recognize the military takeover. The Secretary General has been calling repeatedly for a reversal and return to the democratically elected government. So is the Secretary General under any obligation to accept the letter from the military appointing a new representative when it goes against what he himself is calling for?
Look, the issue of recognition of governments by member states is one for member states to decide on. As I told James, we've received 2 letters with contradictory, to put it simply, indications. We're taking a look at those letters, where they came from, and what we will do, and if and whether or not the Credentials Committee will also get involved. Joe,
But
sorry, go ahead.
Until the Credentials Committee gets involved, does he have to take? Does he have to accept? Their new representative. I mean,
I know. I
fully
understand your very valid and pertinent question. As I said, we are taking a look at these letters and trying to resolve things as quickly as possible from our end. Okay, Joe.
Actually, Maggie asked my question, so I'm coming up with this one.
Okay.
And it's really a follow-up on this issue.
Joe, it sounds like you have a vacuum cleaner running in the background.
Hello?
Okay, yeah, okay, that's better. It sounds like you had a vacuum. It sounds like you have a vacuum cleaner going off in the background.
No vacuum cleaner here.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. Just make it short and to the point.
Short and to the point. There's the UN. There's the Secretary General and the UN itself as establishment consider the Oslo Accords still in effect.
We consider, in effect, all relevant Security Council and General Assembly resolutions. A number of those also, if I'm not mistaken, mention the Oslo Accords. one second, Iftikhar, and then we'll go back to James.
Thank you, Steph. Obviously, the amount raised at the pledging conference for Yemen is inadequate, and the Secretary General has said so. What are the next steps being planned to meet this grave situation?
Well, we will continue. I mean, there are two next steps, right? I mean, we will, on one hand, continue to try to mobilize funds. I mean, these events, these pledging conferences, are kind of one-day events to focus the world's attention, but it's not as if we're not trying to mobilize funds on during every other day. So we are continuing to do that, whether it's the Secretary General, whether it's Mark Lowcock, or other officials, WFP, UNICEF, all the frontline humanitarian agencies who are operating in Yemen. They will continue to do that. But it is clear that without further funding, there risks even greater cuts in the aid. And we're seeing it, you know, in different places around the world, in East Africa, where UNHCR and WFP will have to cut food rations. It's a pretty simple fact. If there is no more money coming in, then it makes it nearly impossible for aid to go out. And that's why we're forced to continue to mobilize for resources for all these emergencies. The other thing we keep doing, because that is part of the solution, is focusing on the political track to bring an immediate ceasefire to Yemen. Okay, James?
Yeah, obviously, the ongoing diplomacy in Myanmar is important. There are talks of a new Security Council meeting. There's been a meeting in the last few hours of ASEAN, which calls on all parties to refrain from instigating further violence. And I wanted to ask the Secretary General, does he really believe there are, I mean, I know he's not ASEAN, but does he, in his view, believe there are lots of parties in Myanmar? Because it seems there are only the people of Myanmar whose will has been subverted in a coup, and the military who carried out that coup. It doesn't seem like there are lots of parties to engage. There's only one party to engage. Does the Secretary General agree with that?
You know, I'm not going to comment on, I mean, I don't know, I haven't seen the ASEAN statement. What is clear for us and what we've been seeing since the coup are people taking to the streets, expressing their views peacefully, and we have seen a harsh and unacceptable crackdown by security forces. It's not an equal fight.
The US ambassador gave her briefing here 24 hours ago, and she said she was hopeful of a Security Council meeting soon. There is word that there could be one this week. So a repeat of my question I asked you yesterday. What does the Secretary General want from the Security Council, and does he think that an arms embargo, individual designations of generals would be helpful now at this stage?
Look, as I've mentioned, we want a strong message from the Security Council to the authorities in Myanmar to reverse course and to undo the coup, to put it simply. The Security Council has at its disposal various tools, which they will have to decide how and when to use. I think it is always very important that whatever within those tools, that it be done in a way that does not hurt the people, right? I'll leave it at that.
Changing subject, your UNSMIL statement you read out earlier on. UNSMIL seemed to be sort of, we can't comment on the panel of experts because we're UNSMIL and they're the panel of experts and they're a different part of the UN. But that doesn't get to the point. UNSMIL supervised the election where there is allegations of corruption. Is UNSMIL confident with the result of that election, or should there be a new election?
As I said before, we stand against corruption, which is an obvious and basic statement to make, but one that still needs to be made. There is a process ongoing. It still has to go through a number of vetting processes, including the House of Representatives, and it's important that that process goes on with the most clarity and transparency as possible for the sake of the people of Libya.
Sorry, that's the process that was put in place, I understand, initially, but now there's potentially a big spanner in the works. Is there a process underway to examine whether this election was legitimate and whether these figures are the legitimate leaders of Libya?
We will continue to focus and support the political process, and we will continue to watch it very carefully.
I'm going to be greedy with one more because it's an important development in the last hour or so, which is Jalalabad. Reports that 3 media workers have been shot dead at a TV station in eastern Afghanistan, or leaving their work at a TV station in eastern Afghanistan. The response of the UN?
Any attack, and especially any targeted attacks, whose aim is to muzzle the media, is to be condemned in the strongest possible term. Okay, unless I see a wave, I will turn it over to.
Stéphane,
yes, Joe.
Go ahead, Joe. I was just trying to follow up here, and I got cut off. First of all, COVAX is indicating that it will be sending shortly vaccines to the Palestinian Authority. I'd like to know whether they have been received and what the timetable is there to receive it. And Secretary General affirmed, and continue to affirm, that Israel has cooperated in the transfer of vaccines ordered directly by the Palestinian Authority, for example, from Russia, into Gaza and into the West Bank.
Yes, we. Thank you. Sorry, you have to check your audio, Joe, because there's somebody doing some secret vacuuming in your apartment. Sorry. To take it seriously, we have said, and I've said here, and we have said how much we have worked with the Palestinians on facilitating the transfer of medicine and technology to both Gaza and the occupied to the West Bank during COVID. We've said it. We've also believed that there are obligations that Israel has under international law. We will work with the Palestinian Authority in supporting their efforts to reach COVAX. All right.